and I would love to, please, to turn the reins over to my colleague, Siobhan Braden. Siobhan.
Well, thanks, Preeti. Hello, everyone. I'm Siobhan Braden, and I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance with NCASE. And on behalf of our entire team, I'm excited to welcome you to this webinar on navigating the transition to kindergarten and school-age care. NCASE is one of the national training and technical assistance centers funded by the Administration for Children and Families. And many of you may already know that NCASE focuses on school-age children and works with states, territories, and tribes to ensure that they have increased access to high-quality after-school and summer learning experiences. Our presenters today, I'm pleased to introduce you, are Katari Coleman, my colleague here at NCASE, Project Director, Karen Nemeth from the National Center on Early Childhood Development, Teaching and Learning, and Leslie Maxfield from the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. And we're so appreciative of our colleagues from other national centers joining us today to share their expertise. Our agenda for today will cover kindergarten transition preparedness, school-age child care, transition practices and processes, and resources. And throughout, we will ask to hear from you on your role, your interests, your expertise, and needs that you might have to strengthen transitions. And in fact, right now we're going to start with a poll about your role. So you can see that there's a poll in the middle of the screen asking what type of organization you represent. And then next to that is a chat pod on asking what do you wish to gain from today's presentation. So it would be great if folks could fill in why did you join us today? And what do you hope to gain from today's presentation? And we'll just take a couple minutes to give people an opportunity to fill in that poll. Okay, it looks like we have quite a few folks from Head Start. Interestingly, we always have a lot of people that are others, even though we try to have as many roles as possible, so that's always interesting. We have some CCDF folks. We have Child Care Resource and Referral, Training and Technical Assistance Organizations, and a few folks from Youth Development. And let's see, there are a lot of interesting comments about what people want to gain from today's presentation, strategies for supporting families, resources and training options for school-age children, and to better understand how the transition process works. A lot of interest, not surprisingly, in supporting parents and families around transitions. And several folks noted that they would like to share information or have ideas on how to work with public schools. Thanks so much. I think we're going to move on to the rest of our presentation. So we can close that poll. Great, thanks. And before we get started on our content for today, I'm going to just quickly give you some working definitions that we use here at NCASE. The field of school-age care and out-of-school time has a number of terms, and so just to be clear, school-age care refers to the age of children served, differentiated from infant, toddler, and preschool care. Out-of-school time refers broadly to programming outside of the school day, so that includes before and after school, summer, weekend, and family or center-based childcare. And finally, our national center name is Afterschool and Summer Enrichment, and we frequently use that interchangeably with out-of-school time. And now I'm going to pass it over to Katari Coleman. Katari?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy that I have this opportunity today to really get to speak on behalf of school-age child care and the kindergarten transition process. So first I want to take a moment here to acknowledge that our nation has and is experiencing difficult times that has implications for education and child care. We hope that our attention to kindergarten transition and school-age child care today will stimulate things to consider as systems and programs continue to and or return to serving the needs of all children and families. So let's get started. For this presentation, we will refer to transition. For this presentation, starting again, we will refer to transition as a process of a child moving from one program or setting to another. When children make the transition from their preschool environment, whatever that may be, to elementary school, they must adjust to new settings and situations, including new rules and expectations, new ways of learning, new relationships with peers and adults, and new physical surroundings. The earliest years are the cornerstone of effective pre-K through 20 systems and the foundation upon which subsequent learning is built. So let's continue on. And we want to get into a little bit around research. We want to start by citing some research that is still very relevant today. In a 2005 study on the effect of school-based kindergarten transition policies and practices on child academic outcomes, researchers established, back then, that's 15 years ago, a link between the number of transition activities that schools facilitated prior to or near the beginning of kindergarten and larger gains in student academic achievement by the end of the year. This effect was strongest for students from low and middle socioeconomic status backgrounds. Thus, transition activities, which are supported by systematic policies and practices, should be shaped by the needs of the individual community, like the needs of working families. So to continue with a focus on research, often for families who rely on full-day child care coverage, the transition to kindergarten marks not just the child's entry into formal school, but it also may be their entry into before school, after school, and summer programming. Many parents rely on child care outside of school hours so they can remain in the workforce. According to the Afterschool Alliance's 2014 America After 3 p.m. report, at that time, nearly 1 in 4 families in the U.S. had a child enrolled in an after-school program. And the majority of those parents agreed that the availability of after-school programs helped them keep their job. With this in mind, NCASE developed a research brief earlier this year to explore and address issues regarding the navigation of transition to kindergarten and school-age care. And 3 points surfaced that you may be aware of: the varying landscape of early education experience of future kindergartners, the need to broaden support for multiple transitions, and there were issues to consider in the transition to kindergarten and school-age child care. There were issues that we found that needed to be brought out. As far as the varying landscape of early education and experience, children enter kindergarten with a wide variety of prior early care and education experiences. Home with parents, Head Start, center-based child care, family child care. They may have stayed with another caregiver or family members, such as relative care, or often there's a mixture of these to meet their their work schedule needs. When children enter kindergarten, these needs still exist, and therefore many parents will need to obtain before school and or after school care for their children, as well as coverage during school vacation weeks, like spring and winter breaks and the summer months. There is also, number two, the need to broaden support for multiple transitions goes back to the previous slide and the need for systematic transition activities and support to support the needs of families, like sharing information, familiarizing children with new environments and routines, talking with children about their upcoming changes that lie ahead, and specific to both kindergarten and school-age child care, like after-school programs. Issues to consider in the transition to kindergarten and school age are the individual needs of the child when it comes to transition. Does the child care program meet the needs of the child? Individual needs of the family. For example, families experiencing homelessness, military families. Then things like transportation needs and program fees. This will connect to information on school-age child care and child care subsidies that we will discuss later in this presentation. So now we will explore some major kindergarten transition factors such as school readiness and family engagement. We will now hear from Karen.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So the National Center for Early Childhood Development, Teaching, and Learning, NCECDTL, considers the components of successful transitions to kindergarten and out-of-school care programs where children are coming from preschool or child care programs. And these transitions really have to be based on academic readiness as well as social emotional readiness. So to strengthen this process, leaders support connections among the preschools, the early childhood programs, out-of-school care programs, and the elementary schools so they can all work together. And our National Center has posted a comprehensive array of resources on the Transitions to Kindergarten page of the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center website. And you can see a picture of it here on this slide. Based on research and policy, the guidance highlights 3 critical components of effective supports for transition. So the first one is about sharing information, such as data, observations about the children, policies among staff, stakeholders, and the people who work in the preschool or child care programs and the people who work in the after school or out of school time programs in elementary schools, so that they're sharing information in 2 directions to support planning and practice. And the second component is building relationships. And it's important to build relationships among the different schools and programs, and to include the families and community members to keep these lines of communication open and combine efforts and resources to pave the way for successful transitions. And then the third component is about aligning programs, about planning ahead through collaboration among the leaders and the staff for joint professional development, for activities that involve staff and families and community members, for assessments, for standards across the board from early childhood, preschool, child care through to the school years, looking at curriculum and collaborating to share information about all of these things so that the details help you to address all of the components together, and they are all covered in the documents and videos on the DTL Transitions to Kindergarten webpage. So for example, we have one document that's called Transitions to Kindergarten, Supporting Children Who Are Dual Language Learners. And this one answers questions about academic and social emotional readiness for children who are dual language learners, and it also covers the regulations. What policies do you need to know about for both schools and families to learn about identifying children who need services to support their language or other kinds of services in kindergarten, what kinds of placement decisions need to be made, and how the preschool and kindergarten staff can work together with families for a smoother transition for each child. And so the links to these resources will appear on our resources slide, and when you have the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access them. So thank you. And now on to Leslie.
Thanks, Karen. I went too far with my, there we go. I'm so happy to be with everyone today, and it's so wonderful to see the diverse group of early childhood professionals who are interested in this topic. And I've seen a lot of familiar names, too, as well from my work in Head Start and in training and technical assistance. So when we think about family engagement and transitions, we think about relationships. And that's the focus of our work, is the relationships that families have with their children, that we have with families, and that we have with community members. So if we think about transition to kindergarten as a major event, as both Karen and Katari have mentioned, we also think that it's really a magical time for children too. And so as much as we can in this crazy world that we're in today, to make sure that we hold on to that magic for children and families, because it's still a pivotal point for establishing practices that can help sustain gains that children have made in their early learning settings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some research on the importance of parent participation. And finding my notes. I had it all set up on my phone. Have you ever done that? Okay. Give me just 1 second. Here we go. Okay. So parent participation in transition activities prior to the new school year has been linked with children's self-confidence, how they like school, and their overall success in kindergarten and happiness. So it really helps with children's social emotional development. When the early childhood programs and schools actively engage families in their child's transition to kindergarten, and when they are also responsive to families' efforts to participate, families show increased involvement during the kindergarten year. So really thinking about the preparation that we do to engage families within this process. And that goes to some of the resources that Karen mentioned. Our center has been working very closely with NCECDTL to develop resources to support all participants, families, children, and schools in the transition. Okay. When the transition to kindergarten includes opportunities for children and families to learn about the new setting, build relationships, and experience continuity in curriculum, assessments, and relationship quality across their changing settings, children show greater school readiness. These practices should be initiated early, prior to kindergarten, and should be tailored to the cultural, linguistic, and learning needs of individual children and their families, and they should also ensure that standards, curriculum, support services, and assessments for Head Start and kindergarten are carefully aligned, and that would go for child care and other early childhood settings as well. And so we really want to make sure that we are sensitive to the needs of all families that we serve, whether their circumstances. We are serving many families in our nation who experience great disparities and are very vulnerable. So we want to make sure that we tailor all of our transition practices to support those families and children as well. So what I'd like to do now is transition back to Katari. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. We want to take this time now that we have covered the importance of kindergarten transition, of the transition to kindergarten in terms of its impact, and knowing that it is should be considered as an individual process for that family and child based on the needs. We want to sort of take this look into what may accompany it, and that is school-age child care. So let's quickly look at the prevalence of school-age child care from the Child Care and Development Fund perspective. You see here, this is one of the school-age, this is the National School-Age Child Care Data Profile that NCASE has published for the last 2 years, and we'll be publishing a new one very soon. Nationally, if you look here, over 600,000 school-age children are served each month, which equates to 45% of all children served through subsidies. Okay? This data and the other information there supports the specific need of working families to secure school-age care in the form of before school, after school, and summer programming and out-of-school time environments, and validates the need to include school-age care as a component of the kindergarten transition process. So given this, we know that there may be tips needed for parents and caregivers. So earlier this year, NCASE published a tip sheet in support of the kindergarten transition process with a focus on school-age child care. This tip sheet, entitled The Transition to Kindergarten and Out-of-School Time Programs, covers tips to consider. Before kindergarten, what will be the care needs? What care needs must be covered? Is it before school? As the school time, backing up a bit, the school time will differ more than likely from the previous environment, child's environment's time, if they were in whatever type of program they were in. Usually we find that the school time is shorter, either with coverage, not enough coverage before school and not enough coverage after school. And so if it's before school, after school, both, or for some, will they just need to consider summer programming? Also, before kindergarten, there should be a selection process considered. Consider the elementary school. So that's your first place to look. Nearby programs, you need to consider cost. You need to visit the program, observe children's staff, and consider your child or the child's specific needs, and also the flexibility of your program to meet these needs. So during and beyond kindergarten, parents and caregivers should gauge the child's comfort and progress, connect with staff and other families, and consider, start right away considering summer and the next year. What did your child enjoy? Will it be the same or the same place, or will you select and look for a new program? This information is helpful to help parents and caregivers to consider when faced with aligning their schedule with a child's new school schedule. So at this time, we would like you to join us and to know what is happening out there. So we have a question or set of questions for you. Does your system, department, or program consider the before and after school child care needs of families during the kindergarten transition process? And if yes, how do you support families around selecting and securing school-age child care? And the majority of you say yes. Your system, department, or program does consider it, and that is fabulous. Okay. We're right about at 72%. But we do have one individual that said we refer them to CCR&R. Okay. Yes, the Child Care Resource and Referral is a great resource that can connect parents to child care across the age continuum as well as school-age child care. And if we could give it a few more, maybe one more minute or so we can read others. If they are in our Head Start program, and this is William, if they are in our Head Start programs, we complete a transition piece with parents and family service workers to transfer them into our before and after school program. Wonderful. And I see others are typing. But what we're getting at here is that we know that every touch the child makes in terms of their kindergarten, their new kindergarten career, as I call it, we have to, it includes not only the child but the family. And those other, there are multiple transitions when a child's family will need additional care, like after-school care. Tricia Haynes, Universal Pre-K in West Virginia consists of collaborations between Department of Education, Head Start, and Child Care. Policy requires they have a transition plan to kindergarten. All right, and then Options for Learning. California has after-school care centers called Surround Care next to most of our centers. Wonderful. And then Rosa recommends all families to participate in the Continuum Summer Boot Camp for only pre-K for students. Wonderful. And Mark says, we introduce the families to the school, their teachers, the administration. They are allowed to spend some time in the classroom during after school time. Great. Thank you guys for some fabulous information, and we will capture the other ones as part of the information we share. Okay, Oklahoma has a state education policy as a requirement to have a transition plan. Yes, yes. So we're going to move along at this time. Thank you for all of your input. So now we will explore some examples of systematic practices and processes to support successful kindergarten transition. And one of the first ones that I get the pleasure of talking about kind of relates to someone said that there was a boot camp in their state, in which their state or municipality, in which children and their families are allowed to attend prior to kindergarten. And so you see here that the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, DECAL, offers a pre-K summer transition program to children registered to enter kindergarten in the fall, but who did not participate in a Georgia pre-K program during the school year, or who require additional help in preparing for kindergarten. This is an example of summer programming funded through Child Care and Development Fund dollars with a major focus of school readiness, which is a major component of kindergarten transition. Participation in this program provides families with the opportunity, we say, to become familiar with expectations of kindergarten for their child and the family schedule. And another thing that is effective is how states are looking at planning in terms of transition plans, as many of you mentioned in the feedback we got from you in the poll. So another way states are addressing transitions in school-age child care is in a review of state PDG birth to 5 proposal goals. Some explicitly prioritize birth through kindergarten transition supports with a focus on school-age child care for families. So for example, you see here that the District of Columbia stated that they would focus on access to before and after school to address transition supports and gaps. And so transition supports as well, but also what I want to point here is that they mention gaps. And a lot of times when children make that transition from their preschool environment or their previous environment to kindergarten, the knowledge of what the family needs to know, what the child needs to know, gets lost along the way. And when you can have a support, when you intentionally say we're going to work to be inclusive of before and after school to address transition supports and gaps, that means that we're going to wrap ourselves around this family to make sure the children's and the family's needs are met. And then we see here also in Massachusetts, they cited out-of-school time programs as a key partner and key partners and stakeholders across several issues. And it is noted throughout their proposal that they are key partners and stakeholders when it comes to transition. So now, Leslie will provide some examples specific to family engagement practices.
Thanks, Katari. Right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about professional development and the relationship-based competencies, which we lovingly call the RBCs. Many of you may be familiar with them because they're being used very widely at the state level in child care through CCR&Rs and also through Head Start. And they are available on the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center. So they're organized, as you can see, as a set of 4 resources. There is an overview, which is lime green, and 3 additional resources designed for specific roles: family service professionals, teachers and child care providers, and home visitors. Each role-specific resource also describes related competencies for supervisors and leaders, because we believe that family engagement is everybody's business. And we found that the supervisors and leaders assessments have been very, very popular. All early childhood professionals can use knowledge, skills, and practices to support family engagement. So this set of resources defines the RBCs for all early childhood professionals and for those in the roles shown on the slide. And to get the most benefit, what we suggest is pairing the overview with the most applicable specific role. So here you can see one of the entire suites. So the series consists of an overview guide and the assessments for staff and their supervisors. And with the assessments, when you find them, you can see that there's a slight variation in color for the staff person and for the supervisors. And the leadership competencies are included in the documents for the supervisors. So what's exciting is that it really shows the knowledge, skills, and practices that we all can use. And there are 10 competencies, so it's possible to go through one competency at a time instead of trying to tackle all of them at once. And if you have any questions, excuse me, you can find all of these resources on the ECLKC. So Siobhan said there's a question about how different we think family engagement will look in child care programs post-COVID. And that's a really good question because we've been having a lot of questions about how we interact with families virtually, and there are a lot of resources that have been developed that are available on excuse me, the ECLKC that talk about virtual support, also thinking about the trauma that families have experienced. But what we're hearing too that's really critical is that staff self-care is important to help maintain those relationships as well. We really need to think about taking care of our staff and what they might need to maintain the relationships. So Katari, I think I turn it back to you, right?
It's actually Siobhan. Thank you so much.
Siobhan, great.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing
You're
those
welcome.
resources. We know that there's, of course, a lot of interest in professional development for staff, and it's really helpful to see an overview of how you've designed it for different staff roles so that it can be really targeted in use with those different roles. So we'd like to hear from you now, again, you're the participants, about the information, given the information that was shared today, what does your system or program need to increase or enhance the support for families during the kindergarten and after-school transition process? And we saw some great examples shared during our previous chat from states, municipalities, and programs about what you're already doing, so that's fantastic. And we'd also just love to hear more about something that you might need that would help to support you in expanding it. Right, Caroline says more staff time allocated for transition planning and visits. And I see multiple people are typing, so we're going to give folks some time to give us your thoughts. And there have been a couple of questions while folks are doing that about the resources that are being shared in this presentation. Those are part of this deck, this presentation, which is downloadable in a files pod that you'll see a little bit later, and we'll also send out a link to it when the archive recording. So we have the list of all those resources, and we also have links to them. And it looks like Jennifer says coordinated efforts between programs ensure school success. Absolutely. More staff training, another comment on that. Guidance on how home visit processes will now happen virtually. Absolutely. And Christine says that my program used to offer after-school care that children could transition into, and now they do not. So additional resources are needed for after-school care. That's a really important one, Christine. more staff training is needed. That's another one about staff training. Learning about and documenting transition examples from states and programs would be a helpful resource to make available. And I know there are some examples in the research brief, and that's always something that we're looking to expand, Susan. And I think we've learned some interesting information today about what some states and programs are doing. Providing professional development that is agency specific. Staff training, another one. I'd say that's probably the most popular topic that people have suggested. And Vivian says we do a kindergarten meeting with local principals to go over the process of transition. So I'm assuming that Vivian's coming from the preschool or Head Start background or program, and is talking about meeting with the local principals, which can be really helpful. And there's a concern about child care deserts in some counties. And absolutely, Jessica's comment to some extent sums up some of the key aspects that we're talking about today, which is really strengthening the partnership between early childhood and the K-12 system. Also, more supports in place to help families find after-school care. Right, that is definitely something that we hear that is needed for parents and families to be able to find after-school care. Katari, we got a question earlier in the chat that was about the Georgia summer pre-K example, and if there is research available on that.
I saw that. Yeah.
You saw it. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Siobhan. Well, I haven't found any particular research. I know that they were their program was focused at the National Summer Learning Association's conference last year in Atlanta. But also they do have reports if you go to their website, and I will try to put the link in the chat. They have the transition program reports with program evaluation highlights. And from the time that they started in 2010 to 2016, and that can give you an idea of maybe the responses from the parents and the caregivers, how they felt the program assisted with the children. And I don't know of any actual research, but you know what? I'm going to look into that for you. There's general research at large that says programs like this are helpful, and we can, if I can take down the name and I can get that to you.
Sure, thanks, Katari. And we can also add that to our message when we send out the summary, or we can add it to the resources list, because that's one that we don't have currently on our resources list. So, it looks like Caroline found evaluations on the DECAL site. So fantastic. Can Caroline or Katari, could you please put that link in the chat, because I think that will be of interest to other participants. And again, we will also add it to our resources list. So just to wrap up our conversation here, there's also a comment about increasing class size and centers offering after-school care, so the concern about supply of enough after-school care to serve families' needs. That's certainly a concern that we've heard, and really appreciate everybody sharing your expertise and your resources and your needs. And hopefully this is helpful for folks to learn from each other as well. So I think we're wrapped up with this, And now I'd like to take a couple minutes to share our resources, most of which were mentioned on this call. We didn't get an opportunity to focus on aligning out-of-school time services for children experiencing homelessness. Obviously, that's an important population to consider, and we have added a brief. We've added a link to that brief here. Katari mentioned the research brief on navigating the transition to kindergarten and school-age care. That's also available, and also the tips for parents and caregivers that Katari highlighted, which would be something that could be shared with parents, and also somebody mentioned working with CCR&Rs. That could be a useful resource for them to share with parents. And then both Leslie and Karen referred to the transition to kindergarten webpage that has multiple resources and a couple of examples. There's a lot of material on there, so we don't have a link to every example, but Karen mentioned the supporting children who are dual language learners, and also a piece on collaboration. So there are a number of resources available on these websites that we hope you'll take advantage of after you've had an opportunity to join us today. As the National Center on Afterschool and Summer Enrichment, we have a resource library, the Out-of-School Time Resource Library, and that's focused specifically on school-age out-of-school time, ages 5 through 13. And we have a number of, we update this quarterly, and it includes tools, profiles, and information on a range of 11 key topics in out-of-school time, including family and community engagement, subsidy, eligibility, and equal access, and summer learning. So some of the concepts that we've talked about today are relevant because we're talking about bridging the preschool to the school age and out of school time. This resource library is focused more on the school age population. So we hope that you'll take an opportunity to take a look at that. As I said, we do update it regularly. And I'm just looking to see if we have any other questions before we wrap up and go to the evaluation. And if anybody does have another question they'd like to type in. I know a few people had questions about certificates. There will be, as we noted in the chat, you'll receive an email with information about how to get a certificate. Okay, so this is our general website information, and Karen's also posting something about the transitions discussion on Twitter at #KeepTheirHeadStart. Karen, can you talk a little bit about that? Can you unmute yourself and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I do want to talk about that because that just came up recently, but the Office of Head Start Director, Dr. Bergeron, is very active and interactive on Twitter, and she has invited people who work in Head Start or who collaborate with Head Start programs to share ideas and resources like we're doing today on Twitter using that hashtag #KeepTheirHeadStart. And so it's a play on words about the Head Start program, but also giving kids a head start as they start into elementary school and out-of-school time programs as well. So hashtag #KeepTheirHeadStart, and you'll see a lot of action going on there to follow up from today.
And
great, thanks. And if oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, this is Leslie. If I could add to what Karen just shared, there's also a large campaign starting that goes along with Keep Their Head Start, and there will be Facebook posts, there will be posts on My Peers groups, and lots of resources coming out every Thursday on the ECLKC as well that help support the transition to kindergarten. And we've also tailored some of the messages for the times that we're going through now, and supporting families who might be sending their children to a summer program before they go to Head Start. Before they go to kindergarten.
Great, thank you both. If you have that information available, could you put the Facebook and the Twitter Head Start links in the chat, in case people aren't already following those accounts?
Sure, I'll grab the Facebook one.
Okay. And can Karen grab the Twitter one while we're wrapping up here?
Doing it now.
Great. Okay, thanks. So we'll get that information in there. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I have to admit I was not aware of that, so I just learned something as well on this webinar, which is fantastic. So now as we wrap up, we'd really appreciate you taking a few minutes to complete the evaluation, and that will launch momentarily. And you can always feel free to contact us at this email address. We welcome your feedback, your questions, your suggestions, and we really appreciate your taking the time to join us today and to contribute your thoughts and ideas to this webinar. Thank you. And Preeti, if you could launch the evaluation now, that would be great.